If you are listening to this late at night, you are exactly where this channel is meant to be heard. These are true psychological horror stories from remote winter roads in Alaska, told quietly, without rushing, without noise. If this kind of night atmosphere feels right to you, subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories now. It helps these stories reach others who listen alone, in the dark, just like you. And before the first story begins, leave a comment. Tell us where you are listening from and what time it is right now. It is always interesting to see how far these nights travel. Story 1. Road that stayed frozen too long. I should have turned back the moment I realized the ice was not melting. Driving along a remote winter road in Alaska, the cold felt heavier than usual. Not the sharp, clean kind of cold that stings your lungs and makes you feel alive. This was something else. Something thick and wrong, like the air itself had died and frozen in place. I had been driving for 3 hours straight, headlights cutting through darkness so complete it felt like the world had been erased behind me. No other cars, no lights from distant houses, just me, my truck, and a 2-lane highway that stretched into nothing. In Alaska, winter roads are quiet, but that night the silence felt deliberate. I am not someone who scares easily. 42 years old, spent most of my life working oil rigs up north, seen my share of isolation and danger. But something about that road made my hands tighten on the wheel. The heater was blasting, yet I could see my breath. The temperature gauge on my dashboard read 72 degrees inside the cabin, but frost was creeping across the inside of my windshield. I wiped it away with my glove. It came back within seconds. The farther the drive went, the more time seemed to slow. I checked my phone. No signal, which was normal out here, but the clock was wrong. It read 11:47 p.m. I had left Fairbanks at 9:15 p.m. The drive to Coldfoot should take about 5 hours, meaning I should only be 2.5 hours in. But my gas gauge told a different story. I was already down to a quarter tank, which made no sense unless I had been driving for far longer than I thought. That was when I saw the first car. It sat on the shoulder about 50 yards ahead, a dark sedan covered in snow. But the snow was strange. Too smooth, too uniform, like it had been placed there by hand rather than fallen from the sky. As I got closer, my headlights revealed something horrifying. The windows were completely iced over, not just frosted but encased in solid ice several inches thick. The entire car looked like it had been dipped in frozen water and left to crystallize. I slowed down, my heart hammering. I should have kept driving. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, but I pulled over anyway. I did not know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe the terrible feeling that whoever was inside that car needed help. I stepped out into the cold, and it hit me like a physical blow. The temperature had to be -40, maybe colder. My breath did not just fog. It crystallized instantly, tiny ice particles falling from my lips like snow. The silence was absolute. No wind, no distant animal sounds, nothing. I approached the sedan, my boots crunching on ice that should not have formed this thick this fast. I wiped at the driver's side window, trying to see inside, but the ice was too thick. I pulled out my pocket knife and started chipping away. It took several minutes, my fingers going numb despite my gloves. When I finally cleared enough to see inside, I wish I had not looked. There was a man in the driver's seat, frozen solid. His hands were still gripping the wheel. His face locked in an expression of pure terror, mouth open in a scream that would never end. His eyes were wide, staring at something in front of him, something I could not see. But worse than that, far worse, was the frost. It was not just on him, it was inside him. I could see it through his skin, like his veins had filled with ice and crystallized outward, creating delicate, branching patterns across his face and hands. I stumbled back, my stomach turning. I ran to my truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I threw myself inside, locked the doors like that would somehow help, and sat there gasping, trying to make sense of what I had seen. I should have turned around, driven back to Fairbanks, called the police when I got signal, but the road behind me was dark, and something deep in my gut told me that going back was not an option anymore. So I kept driving forward, faster now, desperate to put distance between myself and that frozen corpse. 2 miles later, I found the second car, then a third, then a fourth, all the same, all encased in ice, all with people inside, frozen in poses of terror and desperation. One car had a family. 2 small shapes in the back seat that I did not look at closely because I could not bear it. Another had someone who had tried to get out. The driver's side door was open, and a frozen figure stood beside it, one hand reaching toward the road as if trying to flag down help that never came. The road stretched on, and I realized with creeping horror that I had not seen a single mile marker in over an hour. No signs, no landmarks, just endless frozen pavement and those terrible cars appearing every few minutes like monuments to something I did not understand. That was when my truck started to slow down. Not because I was braking. The engine was still running, still roaring, but the truck was decelerating like something was dragging it backward. I pressed harder on the gas. The engine screamed, but my speed kept dropping. 60, 50, 40. The headlights began to dim. The heater sputtered and died, and the cold rushed in. Frost spread across the dashboard, across the seats, across my hands. I could feel it in my chest now, a creeping, crawling sensation like ice water filling my lungs. My thoughts were slowing down, becoming sluggish and thick. I tried to open the door, but my fingers would not respond. I tried to scream, but my jaw had locked. And then I saw it, standing in the middle of the road, perhaps 100 feet ahead, illuminated by my dying headlights. It was tall, too tall, a figure that might have been human once but had been stretched and twisted into something else. Its skin was the color of frost, pale blue and translucent, and I could see darkness moving inside it like smoke trapped under ice. It had no face, just a smooth expanse of frozen flesh where features should have been. But it was looking at me. I felt its attention like a weight pressing down on my skull. It raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at me. The cold surged. My truck stopped completely. The engine died. The lights went out. And in the sudden, total darkness, I heard something. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching on ice. Coming closer. I sat paralyzed, my body refusing to move, my mind screaming at me to run, to do anything, but the cold had me. I could feel it spreading through my veins, turning my blood to slush, my muscles to stone. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear breathing now, low and rasping, like wind through a frozen canyon. Something touched the window beside my head. Not a hand, something else, something cold and sharp that scraped against the glass, leaving trails of frost in patterns that looked almost like words. I forced my eyes to move, to look at what it had written. You should have turned back. The glass cracked, not from impact, but from cold, spider webbing outward in beautiful, terrible fractals. I felt my consciousness fading, the cold pulling me down into darkness. My last thought was a question I would never get to ask. How long had this road been here? How many people had driven down it and never come back? How many frozen cars were scattered along its length, invisible to anyone who had not yet made the same mistake I did? I do not know how long I was out. When I woke, I was still in my truck, but everything had changed. The engine was running. The heater was on. Daylight streamed through the windows, bright and warm and utterly impossible. I sat up, my body aching but functional, and looked around. The road was empty. No frozen cars, no towering figure, just a normal highway cutting through snow-covered wilderness. I checked my mirrors, my windows, looking for any sign of what had happened. Nothing. Even the frost patterns were gone. I drove. I did not stop until I reached Coldfoot 5 hours later, pulled into the first gas station I saw, and sat there shaking while the attendant filled my tank. He was an older man, weathered and quiet, and when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or pity. He leaned down to my window and said, "You look like you have seen something out there." I did not answer. What could I say? He nodded slowly, like he understood anyway. Road gets strange this time of year. People see things. Most do not come back to talk about it. I paid him in cash, hands still trembling, and asked him what he meant. He just smiled, sad and knowing, and walked away. I have been home for 3 weeks now, back in Anchorage, back to normal life, but I cannot shake the feeling that I am still on that road somehow, still driving through that endless frozen night. Sometimes, late at night, I feel the cold in my chest again. Just a flicker, just a reminder, and when I check my rearview mirror, sometimes I see frost creeping across the glass. The doctors say I'm fine. No frostbite, no lasting damage, but they cannot explain the patterns on my hands. The pale blue lines that branch across my skin like frozen veins. They fade in the daylight, but at night, they glow faintly, and I know. The road is not done with me yet. Story 2. Road with no tracks. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the highway ahead of me. It was January, deep into the Alaskan winter. and I had been driving north for hours through an endless corridor of spruce trees and frozen silence. The snow had stopped falling about 20 minutes earlier, leaving everything covered in a fresh white blanket that glowed under my headlights. But here's what made my stomach drop. There were no tire tracks ahead of me. None. Not in my lane, not in the oncoming lane, not even on the shoulder. Just smooth, untouched snow stretching into the darkness as far as I could see. Alaskan winter roads usually show signs of life, even after heavy storms. Plow trucks, local drivers, truckers pushing through the night. Someone always leaves a mark. But this road looked like it had not been touched in days, maybe weeks. That absence made the road feel unused, or worse, avoided. I told myself it was just the timing, that I happened to be the first one out after the snowfall cleared. But even as I thought it, I did not believe it. Because deep down, in that cold part of your gut that knows when something is wrong, I felt it. This road did not want me here. My name is David, and I am a field engineer for an oil survey company. My job takes me to remote parts of Alaska where most people would never go, places so isolated that you could drive for an hour without seeing another human being. I was heading to a monitoring station about 60 miles north of Fairbanks, a routine trip I had made a dozen times before. But tonight felt different. The darkness seemed heavier, thicker, like it was pressing against the windows of my truck. The silence was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat over the hum of the engine. I kept driving, my eyes locked on that perfect, unbroken snow ahead. The highway curved gently through the forest, the trees crowding close on both sides like silent witnesses. My headlights cut through the night, illuminating the falling flakes that had started again, tiny crystals drifting down in lazy spirals. I checked my rearview mirror. My own tire tracks stretched behind me, two dark lines cutting through the white. At least I was leaving evidence that someone had been here. At least I was real. Then I saw it, a shape on the side of the road, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield. As I got closer, the shape resolved into something that made my blood run cold. It was a car, an old sedan, pulled off onto the shoulder and half buried in snow. The windows were dark, no lights, no movement, no sign of life. I pulled up alongside it and stopped, my engine idling in the frozen air. The car looked like it had been there for days. Snow had piled up against the doors and covered the roof in a smooth white dome. But here's what disturbed me. There were no tracks leading to it. No tire marks showing where it had pulled off the road. No footprints around it. Nothing. It was as if the car had simply appeared there, dropped from the sky into the snow. I sat in my truck, staring at the abandoned sedan, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Every logical explanation felt wrong. Maybe the snow had covered the tracks. Maybe the wind had smoothed everything over. But the snow on the road was fresh, barely an inch deep, and there was no wind tonight. The air was perfectly still, so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of my engine cooling. I should have kept driving. Every instinct told me to put the truck in gear and get the hell out of there. But I'm the kind of person who stops when I see someone broken down on the highway. I am the kind of person who checks to make sure people are okay. So I killed my engine, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the night. The cold hit me like a physical force, burning my lungs with every breath. The temperature had to be well below zero, the kind of cold that can kill you in minutes if you are not prepared. I zipped my jacket up to my chin and walked toward the sedan, my boots crunching in the snow. The sound seemed too loud, echoing through the trees like a warning. I aimed my flashlight at the driver's side window. The glass was covered in a thin layer of frost, but I could see through it well enough. The inside of the car was empty. No driver, no passengers, no belongings. Just empty seats and a steering wheel. I tried the door handle. Locked. I walked around to the other side, checking each window, shining my light into the back seat. Nothing. The car was completely abandoned, left here like a piece of trash on the side of the road. But why? And how had it gotten here without leaving any tracks? I stepped back, my breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. That is when I noticed something else. There were no tracks leading away from the car either. Whoever had been driving it had not walked off into the woods. They had not been picked up by another vehicle. They had simply vanished. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I turned in a slow circle, shining my flashlight into the trees. The forest was dark and still, the spruce branches heavy with snow. Nothing moved, nothing made a sound, but I had the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, that something in those shadows was observing me. waiting to see what I would do next. I hurried back to my truck and climbed inside, locking the doors behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I told myself it was just the cold, just the eerie atmosphere of this empty road. But I knew better. Something was wrong here. Something was deeply, terrifyingly wrong. I put the truck in gear and started driving again, faster now, eager to put distance between myself and that abandoned car. But the feeling of being watched did not go away. It followed me, riding in the passenger seat, breathing down my neck. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights behind me. But there was nothing. Just darkness and snow. The road continued to stretch ahead, perfect and unmarked. No other vehicles. No signs of life. Just me and the endless white highway cutting through the frozen wilderness. I started to wonder if I was the only person left in the world, if everyone else had disappeared and I was driving through some kind of nightmare. Then I saw the second car. This one was a pickup truck, newer than the sedan, sitting on the opposite shoulder about a mile down the road. Like the first vehicle, it was covered in snow with no tracks leading to or from it. My headlights swept across it as I passed, illuminating the empty cab, the dark windows, the total absence of human presence. My heart was pounding now, a rapid drumbeat in my chest. Two abandoned vehicles on a road with no tracks. This was not a coincidence. This was not normal. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, pushing my truck faster, desperate to reach the monitoring station, to find other people, to escape whatever was happening on this cursed stretch of highway. The third car appeared 5 minutes later, then a fourth, then a fifth, all of them sitting on the shoulders, all of them empty, all of them surrounded by smooth, unbroken snow. It was like driving through a graveyard of vehicles, each one a monument to something terrible that I could not understand. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The fear was overwhelming now, a primal terror that screamed at me to turn around, to go back, to get off this road. But I could not turn around. Behind me was just more darkness, more abandoned cars, more unanswered questions. The only way out was forward. That is when I saw the figure. It was standing in the middle of the road, maybe 100 yards ahead, perfectly still in the falling snow. At first I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A man, dressed in dark clothes, standing with his back to me, facing north up the highway. I slowed down, my foot hovering over the brake. The figure did not move, did not turn around, just stood there in the center of the road, blocking my path. I stopped about 50 feet away, leaving my headlights on him. I could see now that he was wearing an old winter coat and jeans, but no hat, no gloves. His hands hung at his sides, his head was slightly tilted, like he was listening to something I could not hear. I waited for him to turn around, to wave, to give some sign that he knew I was there. But he remained motionless, a statue in the snow. I honked my horn, the sound sharp and jarring in the silence. The figure did not react. My mouth was dry. My heart was racing. I knew I should not get out of the truck. I knew I should just drive around him and keep going. But I could not shake the feeling that this person needed help, that he was in danger, that I was his only chance. I opened my door and stepped out, leaving the engine running. The cold bit into me immediately. I walked toward the figure, my boots crunching in the snow, my breath coming in short, white gasps. As I got closer, I could see more details. His coat was old and worn. His hair was dark and wet with snow, but he still had not moved, had not acknowledged my presence. I was about 10 feet away when I finally spoke. "Hey, are you okay?" No response. The man stood perfectly still, facing away from me. I took another step closer. "Do you need help? Are you hurt?" Still nothing. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched his shoulder. The moment my fingers made contact, the figure collapsed. Not like a person falling, like a puppet with its strings cut. He crumpled straight down into the snow, his body folding in on itself in a way that was completely unnatural. I jumped back, my heart exploding in my chest. The figure lay face down in the snow, motionless. I stood there, frozen, staring at the dark shape at my feet. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get back in my truck and drive away as fast as possible. But I had to know. I had to see. I knelt down and carefully turned the body over. The face that looked up at me was my own. Same features, same age, same expression of frozen terror. But the eyes were wrong. They were completely black, like pools of ink, reflecting nothing. And the mouth was open in a silent scream that had no sound. I scrambled backward, falling into the snow, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. It was me, dead in the snow, staring up at the night sky with those horrible empty eyes. I do not remember getting back to my truck. I do not remember starting to drive again. The next thing I knew, I was flying down the highway, going 80, 90 miles per hour, the abandoned cars blurring past me in the darkness. The monitoring station was still 30 miles away, but I could not slow down. I could not stop, because I understood now what this road was. It was not unused. It was not avoided. It was a trap, a place where people disappeared, where vehicles appeared without tracks, where you could meet yourself dead in the snow. I never made it to the monitoring station that night. I turned around at the next junction and drove straight back to Fairbanks, barely stopping for fuel. I quit my job the next morning. I have never driven that highway again. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder about that road. I wonder about all those empty cars. And I wonder if somewhere out there, in the snow and the darkness, another version of me is still driving north, following those smooth, trackless roads deeper into the frozen nightmare, searching for a destination that does not exist. Because some roads do not lead anywhere. Some roads just take. If you are still here, then this kind of silence speaks to you. Midnight Whispers Stories is built for listeners who return night after night, not for shock, but for atmosphere. If these stories are working for you, take a second to like the video. It quietly tells YouTube to keep this place alive. And if you want more nights like this, subscribe. Let us know in the comments what time you're listening right now. Some people are just starting their night, others are trying to sleep. Story 3. Cold that followed me home. I need to tell you something horrifying that happened to me last winter. Something that still makes me check the locks on my doors every single night. This story is not fiction. This is a warning about what lives in the frozen darkness of Alaska and why some roads should never be traveled alone. It started when my heater stopped working somewhere between Fairbanks and nowhere. I was driving a rental truck through Alaska in February, hauling equipment for an oil survey job that promised good money. The kind of money that makes you ignore the warnings about winter travel. The kind that makes you stupid. For the first hour, I did not notice anything wrong. The heater hummed along, keeping the cab warm against the negative 30 degrees outside. But somewhere past mile marker 187, the warmth began to fade. Not all at once. That would have been normal, expected, fixable. This was different. The heat drained away like something was drinking it, pulling it out through the vents and windows, even though everything was sealed tight. I cranked the heater to maximum. The fan roared but pushed out air that felt increasingly cold, increasingly wrong. Within 20 minutes, I could see my breath. Within 30, my fingers started going numb on the steering wheel. The temperature outside was negative 30. Inside my truck, it felt like negative 40, colder than the air surrounding me. That should not be possible. The highway stretched empty in both directions. No other vehicles. No lights. Just endless snow-covered spruce trees pressing close to the road, their branches heavy and dark against the white landscape. My phone had no signal. It had not had signal for 60 miles. The next town was another 80 miles ahead. Turning back meant the same distance. I kept driving forward because stopping meant freezing to death, and I was already shaking so hard my teeth chattered. That was when I saw the figure standing beside the road. It appeared suddenly in my headlights, maybe 50 yards ahead. A person, or something shaped like a person, standing perfectly still in the snowbank. No car nearby, no tracks leading to or from the spot. Just standing there in the killing cold, watching my approach. In Alaska, you stop for stranded travelers. It is an unwritten law. Out here, not stopping can mean someone dies, but something felt deeply, terribly wrong about this figure. As I got closer, details emerged that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. The figure wore no coat, no hat, no gloves, just a thin shirt and jeans, standing motionless in temperatures that would kill an exposed person in under 10 minutes. The face was pale, impossibly pale, like skin that had never seen sun. And the eyes, even from inside my truck, even through the dirty windshield, I could see those eyes watching me with an intensity that felt hungry. I should have kept driving. Every instinct screamed to accelerate past this thing and never look back. But my headlights caught something else as I approached. Scratches on the roadside snow. Long, deep scratches, like something with fingers had been clawing at the frozen ground. And around the figure, the snow seemed darker, stained with something that might have been oil or might have been old blood. My truck slowed on its own. I swear I did not touch the brake pedal. but the vehicle decelerated as if something had grabbed it from underneath. The figure tilted its head, studying me, and took one step toward the road. Then another. Its movements were wrong, too fluid, like joints bending in directions joints should not bend. The temperature inside my cab dropped another 10 degrees. The windows began frosting over from the inside, delicate patterns of ice spreading across the glass like reaching fingers. My heater was still running full blast, but now the air coming from the vents felt arctic, felt malicious, felt like it wanted me dead. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The engine revved, but the truck barely moved, tires spinning on ice that had not been there moments before. The figure was now at the edge of my headlight beam, close enough that I could see it smile. It was not a human smile. The mouth opened too wide, showed too many teeth that were too white and too sharp. That was when my truck finally found traction and lurched forward. I shot past the figure doing 60, 70, 80 miles per hour on a road rated for 40. In my rearview mirror, I watched it turn to follow my movement, that impossible smile never fading. Then the darkness swallowed it completely, but the cold remained, the terrible, unnatural cold that had nothing to do with Alaska winter and everything to do with something else. Something that had noticed me. For the next hour, I drove in shaking terror while my heater could not keep up with the freezing air that seemed to seep through every seal and crack. My fingers went numb. My toes lost all feeling. Frost spread across the inside of every window until I could barely see the road ahead. I cranked the defroster, but it did nothing. The cold was not coming from outside anymore. It was coming from inside the truck itself, rising up from the floorboards, pressing down from the ceiling, surrounding me like a living thing. Every few miles, I would see another figure beside the road, always standing alone, always watching, always wearing too few clothes for the killing cold. And each time I passed one, the temperature dropped further. My mind started playing tricks. I began seeing movement in the trees, shapes darting between the trunks, keeping pace with my truck even at 80 miles per hour. I told myself it was exhaustion, hypothermia, fear. But deep down, I knew I was being hunted. The radio, which had been silent for hours, suddenly crackled to life. Not music, not voices, just breathing, slow, wet breathing that came from everywhere at once, from all the speakers simultaneously. I punched the power button, but the sound continued, growing louder, more insistent. The breathing of something massive, something that surrounded my vehicle completely. Then the scratching started. It came from underneath the truck. A horrible scraping sound of metal on metal, like fingers with knife blade nails dragging along the undercarriage. The sound moved from back to front, slow and deliberate, and I realized with horrifying clarity that something was underneath my moving vehicle, clinging to the bottom, crawling forward. I floored the accelerator. 90 miles per hour, 100. The scratching grew more frantic, more angry. The cold became so intense that ice began forming on my eyebrows, my eyelashes. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see. And still the temperature fell. That was when I noticed the gas gauge. It had been 3/4 full an hour ago. Now it sat below empty, the needle buried past the impossible. I had not stopped. I had not been idling. I had lost an entire tank of gas to nothing, to nowhere. The engine coughed, sputtered, the worst sound in the world. No. I was going to die out here. Whatever was under my truck, whatever was following me through the trees, whatever had been standing beside the road wearing human skin, it was going to get me. The truck was going to die and I was going to freeze and something terrible was going to find me. The headlights flickered, dimmed. Through the frosted windshield, I saw the road ahead disappearing into absolute darkness. No stars, no moon, just a wall of black that felt alive, that felt aware, that felt like it had been waiting for me specifically. Then, like a miracle, like divine intervention, I saw lights ahead. Real lights, electric lights, a truck stop, materializing out of the darkness like something from a dream. I had never been so happy to see fluorescent signs in a parking lot. My truck coughed one final time and I coasted into the lot on fumes and prayer, rolling to a stop outside the main building. The scratching underneath ceased immediately. The breathing on the radio cut off mid-exhale. The cold remained, but it was normal cold now. Alaska cold, the cold of winter air and not something else. I sat in my truck for 5 full minutes, shaking, crying, unable to make myself move. Through the windows, I could see other truckers inside the building, drinking coffee, looking at phones, living normal lives. They had no idea what was out there in the darkness. What hunted the empty roads? What wore human shapes and smiled with too many teeth? Finally, I forced myself out of the truck and stumbled into the warmth of the building. The heat hit me like a physical force and I nearly collapsed. A waitress rushed over, helped me to a booth, brought me coffee and blankets. She said I looked like I had seen a ghost. I told her I had seen something worse. While I sat there warming up, I looked out the window at my truck. In the parking lot lights, I could see something I had missed in the darkness. Long scratches ran the length of the undercarriage, deep gouges in metal that should not gouge. And in the snow beneath the truck, there were marks, handprints, dozens of them, too large to be human, with fingers too long, pressed into the snow in a circle around where my vehicle had stopped. I asked the waitress how far to the next town. She said 15 miles. I told her I had been driving for 2 hours since passing that figure on the road. She looked at me strangely and said there was nothing between here and Fairbanks but empty road. No figures, no stranded travelers, just trees and darkness and things that should not exist. I sold that truck the next day, took a massive loss, did not care. I flew back to the lower 48 and swore I would never return to Alaska in winter. But here is the thing that keeps me awake at night, the thing that makes me check my locks and sleep with lights on. 3 weeks after I got home, my heater stopped working. Not in my car, in my house. The furnace runs fine, the thermostat shows 70 degrees, but I can see my breath in my bedroom. Ice forms on the inside of my windows. And sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching underneath my floorboards. The cold followed me home. Whatever I passed on that road, whatever hunted me through the Alaska darkness, it is not finished. It is patient. It is waiting. And it is getting closer every night. Because the heater could not keep up then. And it cannot keep up now. Story 4. Mile marker half buried. I should have turned back the moment I saw it leaning there in the snow, crooked and wrong, like a gravestone pushed up from frozen earth. But I kept driving. That was my first mistake. The winter roads in Alaska do not forgive hesitation or stupidity. I learned that truth the hard way, on a highway that should not exist according to my GPS, marked only by metal posts every mile to remind you that civilization still has some claim on this frozen nightmare. Mile markers, simple things, numbers bolted to steel, half buried in snowdrifts, telling you where you are when everything else looks identical and white and endless. I was 3 hours outside Fairbanks when I saw mile marker 47 for the first time. Nothing unusual about it, just metal and numbers, tilted slightly in the wind. I remember thinking it looked lonely out there, standing watch over nothing but darkness and ice. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. My headlights cut through falling snow that moved like static across a dead television screen. No other cars, no houses, just trees pressed close to the road, their branches heavy and black. I was heading to a research station near the Canadian border, a 2-day drive that I had stretched into 3 because the weather kept getting worse. My company had sent me to deliver equipment. Boring work, the kind that makes you careless, the kind that makes you stop paying attention to the small details that might save your life. Mile marker 48 passed, then 49. The road curved through a valley where the trees grew so thick I could barely see 10 feet into the forest. My radio had died an hour ago. Just static and occasionally a voice speaking Russian, which made no sense this far from anywhere. I turned it off. The silence inside the truck felt heavy, oppressive, like something waiting. That was when I saw mile marker 47 again. At first, I thought I had gotten turned around somehow. Easy to do in a whiteout. Easy to lose direction when every mile looks like the last. But I checked my compass. Still heading north, still on the same road. And yet there it was, leaning in the snow at the exact same angle, mile marker 47, half buried just like before. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Fear crept into my chest, cold and sharp. I told myself it was a mistake, a different marker. Maybe the numbers had worn off the others and someone had replaced them wrong. Reasonable explanations, safe explanations, the kind you tell yourself when reality starts bending in ways your mind cannot accept. I kept driving. Mile marker 46 appeared next, then 45. The numbers were going backward now, and that wrongness settled deep into my bones. I was driving north. The markers should increase, should pull me forward toward something. Instead, they were dragging me back, counting down like a clock running out of time. The snow fell harder. My windshield wipers scraped across glass, leaving streaks that made everything blur. I thought about stopping, about sleeping in the truck until morning. But something in the darkness outside made that idea feel dangerous, unsafe, like stopping would mean never starting again. mile marker 44, then 43. And then, impossibly, marker 47 appeared once more. I slammed on the brakes. The truck slid sideways on ice before stopping in the middle of the road. My breath came fast and panicked. This was not possible. Could not be possible. I had driven past this same marker 3 times now, and each time it stood there crooked and half buried, watching me with its painted numbers like eyes. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a physical thing. Painful, stealing the air from my lungs. I walked to the marker and knelt beside it, brushing snow from the base. The metal was old, rusted, the paint chipped and faded. But the number was clear, 47, and beneath it, scratched into the steel with something sharp, were words I had not noticed before. Turn back. They are waiting. My blood turned to ice water. Someone had carved those words deep into the metal. Not recently. The scratches were old, weathered, filled with rust and frozen dirt. Whoever wrote them had been here years ago, maybe decades, and they had been afraid enough to leave a warning. I looked up at the road ahead. The snow had stopped falling. The forest stood silent and black on both sides. And in that silence, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Footsteps, crunching through snow, coming from behind me. I spun around. Nothing there, just my truck idling in the road, headlights cutting through darkness. But the sound continued, slow, deliberate, circling. I could not see what made them, could not see anything moving in the trees. But the footsteps were real, heavy boots breaking through ice crust. Getting closer, I ran back to the truck and locked the doors. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The engine roared as I pressed the accelerator. Tires spun on ice before catching. The truck lurched forward. Mile marker 48 passed. Then 49. Relief flooded through me. I was moving forward again, away from whatever had been circling in the darkness, away from marker 47 and its scratched warning. The road climbed a hill. My headlights swept across snowbanks and frozen trees. And then I saw them, standing in the road ahead. 3 figures, motionless, facing me. They were not dressed for the cold. That was the first wrong thing. No coats, no hats, just thin clothes that hung loose on frames too tall and too thin to be human. Their skin was pale, colorless, like they had been frozen and thawed too many times. And their faces, God help me, their faces were blank, smooth, no eyes or mouth or nose. Just empty flesh stretched tight over skull. I jerked the wheel. The truck skidded off the road and crashed through snowbank into trees. Branches scraped metal, glass cracked. My head slammed against the steering wheel and everything went bright and sharp with pain. When I opened my eyes, the truck had stopped. The engine still running, headlights pointing into forest. I tasted blood, my vision swam. And standing at the edge of the light, just beyond the broken windshield, was one of the figures. Closer now, close enough to see that its skin was not pale but translucent. I could see bones beneath, could see the outline of ribs and spine through flesh that looked frozen and dead. It tilted its head, studying me, then it raised one hand and pressed it against the cracked glass. The windshield spider webbed under its touch. Ice spread from where its fingers made contact, crawling across the glass in fractured patterns. And I heard it then. A voice, not speaking, not making sound, but inside my head, cold and hollow and ancient. You should not be here. I scrambled backward. My hand found the door handle. I fell out into snow and started running. Did not know where, did not care, just away. Away from the truck and the thing with no face in the road that kept pulling me backward through numbers that made no sense. The forest swallowed me. Branches tore at my jacket. Snow filled my boots. My breath came in gasps that burned my lungs. Behind me, I heard more footsteps. Not crunching anymore. Gliding. Sliding through snow without sound. Getting closer. Always closer. I broke through trees into a clearing and stopped. In the center stood another mile marker. Marker 47. Half buried. Leaning at that same crooked angle, and carved into the snow around it were footprints. Hundreds of them, circling the marker in patterns that spiraled inward like a ritual, like something had been dancing here, worshipping. The footsteps behind me stopped. I turned slowly. They stood at the edge of the clearing. 5 of them now, tall and thin and wrong. Their blank faces all turned toward me, waiting, and I understood then, this was their place. Their road. The mile markers were not guides for travelers. They were warnings. Boundaries, and I had crossed into something old and hungry and patient. Something that had been waiting in the frozen darkness for anyone stupid enough to ignore the signs. The figures moved forward, not walking, gliding across snow without disturbing it. I backed toward the marker. My legs hit metal. I fell, and as I scrambled backward through snow, My hand touched something buried beneath the drift. Something hard. I dug frantically and pulled free a metal plate. A license plate. Old, rusted, from a truck registered in 1987. Others were buried here too. I could see them now. Pieces of vehicles, scraps of clothing, a watch still strapped to bones. This clearing was not empty. It was a graveyard, and everyone buried here had made the same mistake I had. They had ignored the warning. They had kept driving. They had seen marker 47 and thought it was just metal and numbers instead of a door into something else. Something wrong. The figures surrounded me. Their hands reached down, fingers long and thin and frozen. I closed my eyes and waited for whatever came next. But their touch never landed. Instead, I felt heat, sudden and shocking. I opened my eyes to see headlights cutting through the trees. A truck, real, solid, with Alaska plates and a CB antenna. The figures were gone, vanished like they had never existed. An older man climbed out of the truck. He looked at me, looked at the clearing, and his face went pale. "Get in, now." I did not argue. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before he spoke again. "You saw marker 47. I nodded. "Did you turn back when you saw it twice?" "No." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Marker 47 does not exist anymore. They removed it in 1991 after 12 people disappeared on this stretch of road. But it still shows up, still warns people, and those that ignore it do not come back." We drove until sunrise, until the road looked normal again, until mile markers counted forward like they should. He dropped me at a truck stop and drove away without giving his name. I never delivered that equipment, never went back to that road. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps outside my window. Slow, deliberate, circling. And I know they are still waiting, still watching, still counting down from marker 47, where the road bends backward and the frozen things remember everyone who ignored their warning. Story 5. Road crested the same hill twice. I need to tell you what happened on Highway 3 in Alaska, because if I do not say it out loud, I will lose my mind. This is not some campfire tale or an urban legend passed around by bored travelers. This is what happened to me 3 nights ago, and I have not slept since. I was driving alone through the interior on a delivery route I had taken 100 times before. Winter in Alaska is not like winter anywhere else. The darkness swallows everything. The cold is not just uncomfortable, it is a presence, something that wraps around your truck and squeezes. That night, the temperature had dropped to 30 below, the kind of cold that makes your breath freeze inside your lungs. The highway stretched empty in both directions. No other cars, no lights except my headlights cutting through the black. Just endless snow and those skeletal trees pressing in from both sides like they were watching. I had been on the road for 6 hours straight, and my body ached from sitting in the same position, but I was making good time. I wanted to reach the depot before midnight. That is when the road crested the same hill twice. The first time, I noticed the view because it was particularly desolate. A long downward slope with a frozen creek bed at the bottom, barely visible in the darkness. Beyond that, the road curved left around a stand of dead spruce trees. I remember thinking how the moonlight made the ice on the creek look like broken glass. It was beautiful in a haunting, unsettling way that only Alaska can be. I drove down the hill, crossed the creek, took the curve. Everything normal. 15 minutes later, my headlights climbed another rise, and when I reached the top, my stomach dropped. The exact same view spread out before me. The same downward slope, the same frozen creek at the bottom, the same curve around the same dead trees. Even the moonlight hit the ice in exactly the same pattern, creating those same glittering shards of frozen light. I felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. My first thought was that I had gotten turned around somehow, maybe taken a wrong turn without realizing it. But that was impossible. Highway 3 is a straight shot for miles in this section. There are no turnoffs, no side roads, nothing. Just the highway cutting through the wilderness. I checked my GPS. It showed me exactly where I should be, progressing forward, 20 miles past where that hill should have been. But the view outside my windshield told a different story. My heart started hammering in my chest. That primal fear that comes when your brain cannot reconcile what your eyes are seeing with what should be possible. I drove down the hill again, crossed the creek again, took the curve again. This time I was paying attention to every detail, looking for any difference, any sign that this was a different location. There was none. The creek bed had the same pattern of rocks poking through the ice. One of the dead spruce trees had a broken branch hanging at the same angle. Everything was identical. The temperature gauge on my dashboard started flickering. The numbers jumped randomly between 30 below and 60 below and back again. The radio, which had been playing static country music from a distant station, cut out completely. The silence that replaced it was so thick I could feel it pressing against my eardrums. That is when I noticed the tire tracks. Fresh tire tracks in the snow, leading down the hill ahead of me. My tire tracks? I could see where my wheels had compressed the powder snow into those distinctive patterns. I was following my own path, even though that was impossible. I had only been here once before, 15 minutes ago, and these tracks looked fresh, like they had just been made. The terrifying thing about fear is how it builds. It starts as a small knot in your stomach, then spreads through your chest, then fills your entire body until every nerve is screaming at you to run. But where do you run when the road itself is wrong? I kept driving. What else could I do? Stop and freeze to death? I pushed the accelerator harder, trying to speed through this nightmare section of highway. The engine roared. The speedometer climbed to 70. Then 80. Way too fast for these conditions, but I did not care. I needed to get past this. The road crested another hill. My headlights swept upward, then down. The same view, again. 3 times now. The same frozen creek. The same dead trees. The same terrible moonlight turning everything into a silver nightmare. I actually screamed, a raw sound that surprised me with its intensity. My voice sounded small and pathetic inside the truck cab, swallowed immediately by the darkness pressing against the windows. I slammed on the brakes. The truck slid on the ice, fishtailing wildly before coming to a stop at the top of the hill. My breath came in short gasps, fogging the windshield. I sat there, engine idling, staring at that impossible view stretching out below me. That is when I saw the figure, standing beside the frozen creek, perfectly still, was a shape that might have been human. It was too far away to make out details, just a dark silhouette against the white snow. But it was watching me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to go down that hill again. But the alternative was sitting here until I ran out of gas and froze. I put the truck in gear and started forward, slowly this time, my eyes locked on the figure below. As I descended, it did not move, did not react, just stood there beside the ice, a dark vertical line in all that horizontal emptiness. When I was about 50 yards away, my headlights finally reached it, and I saw what it was. Nothing. There was nothing there, just a shadow cast by one of the dead trees, falling across the snow in a way that had looked human from a distance. Relief flooded through me, so intense it made me dizzy. Just a shadow, just a trick of the light in my terrified imagination. I crossed the creek bed and took the curve around the trees, and that is when every light in my truck died. The headlights, the dashboard, the GPS screen, everything went black simultaneously. The engine kept running, but I was suddenly driving blind through absolute darkness. I hit the brakes again, my heart trying to pound its way out of my chest. The truck stopped. In the silence, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Footsteps, crunching through snow, coming from behind my truck. Slow, deliberate steps, getting closer. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking so badly I dropped it twice before getting it on. I pointed it out the back window. Nothing. Empty road, empty snow, no footprints except my tire tracks. But the footsteps continued. Crunch, 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 right outside my door now. So close I should have been able to see whatever was making them, but there was nothing. Just that sound, circling my truck, patient and unhurried. The temperature inside the cab plummeted. My breath came out in thick clouds. Frost started forming on the inside of the windows, spreading in those intricate crystalline patterns. But too fast, way too fast. In seconds, every window was covered in a thick layer of ice from the inside. I was sealed in a freezing metal tomb with something circling outside. The footsteps stopped. Everything went quiet. I sat there in the darkness, flashlight beam shaking across the frost-covered windshield, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The cold was getting unbearable. I could not feel my fingers anymore. Then all the lights came back on. Headlights, dashboard, everything. The engine was still running like nothing had happened. The ice on the windows was gone. Just vanished. I checked the temperature gauge. 30 below. Normal for out here. The GPS showed me exactly where I should be. I looked out at the road ahead. Different view. A long straight section with no hills, just like the map said should be there. Whatever had happened was over. I drove for the next 3 hours without stopping, my entire body rigid with fear, expecting at any moment to crest that same hill again. But I did not. The road stayed normal. I reached the depot just after 1 in the morning. The guy who unloaded my truck said I looked like I had seen a ghost. I did not tell him what happened. Who would believe it? But here's the thing that keeps me awake now, the detail that makes this so much worse. When I got home and checked my truck, this black box, the GPS logger that tracks every mile for the company, it showed I had been stationary for 2 hours and 17 minutes. Right at that hill, the timestamp matched exactly when I thought I was driving through that loop, experiencing the same view over and over. I was not moving. I was sitting still while something made me think I was driving, made me see that impossible repeating road, made me experience that terror again and again. And I still do not know what it wanted, or why it let me go, or if it is done with me. 3 nights ago, this happened. Last night, I had to drive the same route again for work. I almost quit, almost walked away from 20 years of driving. But bills do not pay themselves, and Alaska does not care about your fear. When I reached that section of Highway 3, I was sweating despite the cold. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Every muscle in my body was tense for that hill to appear. It did not. The road was normal, but as I drove past where it should have been, my headlights caught something in the ditch. A truck, overturned, half buried in snow. Old, maybe from the 70s. The kind of decay that takes decades. I did not stop to look closer. I kept driving, but in my rearview mirror, just for a second, I saw a figure standing beside that wrecked truck. Just standing there, watching me drive away. The road crested the same hill twice for me. How many times did it crest for the driver of that truck before they stopped counting? Before they could not leave? I do not know if I escaped or if I am just waiting for the road to call me back. Either way, I will never feel safe on Highway 3 again. Story 6. Road behind. What if the road you were driving on was actively erasing itself, and you had no way to turn back? That question would not leave my head as I gripped the steering wheel on the Dalton Highway in Alaska, watching my rearview mirror with growing terror. The snow was falling only behind me, only behind my car, and I had no explanation for it. My name is Marcus. I am a logistics coordinator from Seattle, and I had taken this job driving supply routes through Alaska for a contractor because the money was exceptional and I thought I needed the isolation. I was wrong about needing it. What I found in that isolation was something far worse than loneliness. The drive that morning started normal enough. I left from the depot in Fairbanks before dawn, my vehicle a heavy-duty truck loaded with equipment for a remote research station. The sky was the color of old concrete. The temperature read -23 degrees Fahrenheit. The radio kept crackling with static and distant voices I could not understand. The Dalton Highway stretches for about 500 miles through some of the most desolate territory on Earth. I had driven it 3 times before without incident, but something about this particular morning felt different. The air felt thicker, the silence felt heavier, the darkness seemed to cling to the edges of my headlights rather than being pushed back by them. Around mile marker 170, the snow began. It was not a gradual thing. It did not build up slowly as weather typically does. One moment, the road ahead was dry and dark, stretching into the haunting landscape of bare trees and frozen earth. The next moment, snow began to fall. But here's the terrifying detail that would consume my thoughts for the next 16 hours. The snow fell only in my rearview mirror. I noticed it first as a faint haze behind the truck. I thought perhaps I was mistaken. The human eye plays tricks in extreme conditions, especially in the darkness and vast emptiness of the Alaskan wilderness. But when I adjusted the mirror and focused on what lay behind me, the truth became undeniable. A thick, heavy snowstorm was developing, gathering intensity, and it was moving toward my car exclusively. The road ahead remained clear, bone dry, utterly untouched. The road behind was becoming a nightmare. I told myself it was a localized weather phenomenon. I had heard stories from other drivers about strange atmospheric conditions in the north, how the landscape could create illusions and unpredictable shifts in temperature and visibility. But knowing the scientific explanations did not stop the creeping terror that was beginning to settle in my chest. I accelerated slightly, hoping to outrun whatever was developing behind me. The truck responded, and the engine rumbled with effort against the frozen landscape. I watched the mirror constantly now, unable to focus properly on what was ahead. The snow behind me was falling thicker, more aggressive, more disturbing. It was rising up from the road itself, swirling around my trailer, creating a wall of white that seemed to be moving with its own purpose. The phenomenon should have stopped. Weather patterns do not work like this. They spread, they expand, they move across terrain with the logic of atmospheric pressure and temperature gradients. They do not follow a single vehicle down a remote highway in Alaska like something alive and hunting. But that is exactly what this was doing. Made the first radio call at mile 182. I reached the dispatch station in Fairbanks and reported the creepy weather conditions. I described the snow, the way it seemed to be falling only behind my vehicle, the eerie feeling that something was very wrong. The dispatcher, a woman named Patricia, said she was looking at the satellite data, and there was no storm on the radar. No weather system, no precipitation anywhere in my region. She asked me to describe my location and the condition of my vehicle. I told her everything was functioning normally. The truck was running fine. My GPS was working. The road ahead appeared safe. But behind me, there was a nightmarish wall of snow, growing higher, moving faster, and it felt wrong in a way that science did not seem to account for. Patricia told me to continue to the next checkpoint station. There was a facility about 40 miles ahead where I could stop, check the truck, and regroup. She said the weather data showed clear conditions all the way to the station, and she would monitor the situation. I drove faster. The snow behind me grew thicker, denser, more suffocating in appearance. It was no longer just falling. It was piling up. I could see it accumulating on the road surface behind me, creating a barrier that seemed to be cutting off my escape route with each passing moment. The terrifying realization began to crystallize in my mind. I could not go back. The road behind me was closing. The snow was not following me forward. It was following me backward, sealing away everything I had already traveled. The landscape around me became increasingly haunting. The trees along the highway appeared skeletal and twisted, their dark branches reaching toward my vehicle like something terrifying and hungry. The frozen earth on either side of the road seemed to stretch into an endless, desolate void. The darkness beyond my headlights felt absolute and total. The kind of darkness that made me understand why people feared the unknown. I realized with disturbing clarity that I was driving deeper and deeper into a location from which I might not be able to escape. Mile marker 200 arrived with no changes. The road ahead remained clear. The road behind became more nightmarish by the minute. The snow had formed a complete wall now, a solid barrier of white and darkness that seemed to be slowly advancing toward me. I could feel it in my mind like something creeping, something stalking, something with intention. I made another call to Patricia. This time, my voice was shaking. I told her that the snow was now visible in my headlights as well, but only to the rear. I asked her if there were any other vehicles on the highway behind me. She confirmed that there were no other registered vehicles in my sector. I was completely alone on that stretch of the Dalton Highway. The isolation of that fact hit me harder than any physical danger could have. I was utterly, completely alone in one of the most remote and unforgiving environments on Earth. And something deeply unusual was happening that nobody else could verify or explain. Patricia suggested that I pull over to the shoulder and wait for the snow to pass. But I refused. The very idea of stopping and letting that advancing wall catch up to me was unbearable. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving forward, to maintain distance between myself and whatever was happening behind my truck. I accelerated to 60 miles per hour, then 70. The truck was not designed for these speeds on a remote northern highway, and the tires gripped the cold asphalt with a tenuous hold. I was driving recklessly, but the alternative was worse. The alternative was sitting still and letting the creepy phenomenon catch me. In my mirror, the snow was now less than 100 yards behind me. The checkpoint station should have appeared around mile 220, but it did not. I passed mile markers obsessively, checking my odometer, watching the GPS, but the station remained absent. Patricia assured me I was on the correct highway and that the facility definitely existed. She could see my position on her tracking system. The station should be coming up very soon. But it was not. The snow was 40 yards behind me now, 50 at most. I could see the swirling texture of it in my mirror, could see the way it seemed to possess weight and substance, could feel, with supernatural certainty, that whatever was happening was not bound by the normal laws of physics or weather science. The nightmare scenario that every solo driver fears was manifesting around me with terrifying clarity. I was completely isolated. The road behind me was being erased. The road ahead was leading me deeper into wilderness. The night was absolute and suffocating, and I was running out of time. Then I saw the lights. A structure appeared in my headlights, and my heart leapt with something close to hope. The checkpoint station. It had to be. But as I drew closer, the structure resolved into something else entirely. It was a building, yes, but not the modern facility I expected. It was old, weathered, abandoned. The walls were gray and rotting. The windows were dark and vacant. It looked like it had been standing empty for decades, slowly being consumed by the harsh Alaskan climate. I could not stop. I sped past it, and my rearview mirror captured the sight of that eerie structure receding into the distance, framed by the advancing snow. And I realized with sickening dread that the building looked familiar. I had passed it before, on my previous trips, mile marker 235. The same location, the same abandoned structure, and the same disturbing sensation that the road was folding back on itself. The snow was almost touching my bumper now. I was driving in a state of pure panic, my hands gripping the wheels so tightly that my knuckles were white. The GPS was still functioning, showing me moving forward along the highway. Patricia was still on the radio, her voice becoming increasingly concerned as she registered the tone of my fear. I told her what I was seeing: the abandoned building, the snow, the impossible way that the road seemed to be repeating itself, the way that no matter how far I drove forward, everything looked the same. The same trees, the same landscape, the same emptiness. Patricia was silent for a long moment. Then she told me something that made my blood freeze. She said the checkpoint station had been destroyed in an accident 15 years ago. It was no longer in service. The building I had passed was not the checkpoint. There was nothing ahead on that highway for the next 70 miles except wilderness. She said that my GPS was showing me moving forward, but the satellite data showed something different. She said I was not moving at all. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I looked ahead, and for the first time, I truly understood what was happening. The landscape ahead was not changing. The miles were not passing. I was running my truck faster and faster, accelerating into darkness, but I was covering no ground. The road ahead was standing still while the road behind was being swallowed by snow. I was being compressed, trapped in a space that was becoming smaller with each passing second. The snow touched my bumper, and my mirrors filled with white. I could not see behind me anymore. The road behind me had ceased to exist, and in that moment of complete and utter horror, I realized something that turned the creepy sensation into pure, distilled terror. The snow was not falling behind me because of any weather phenomenon or localized atmospheric condition. It was falling because something was following me. Something was erasing the road in my wake. Something was slowly closing the space between us. And whatever it was patient. It did not rush. It simply advanced, moment by moment, snowfall by snowfall, taking away my escape route while driving me deeper into the darkness ahead. The checkpoint station appeared again in my headlights. Mile marker 235. Again. But this time, I could see lights inside the abandoned building. Dim, sickly yellow lights that flickered like something alive and dying. And in those windows, I could see movement. Shadows passing back and forth. Shapes that were humanoid but moved in ways that were deeply wrong. The snow was completely surrounding me now. It filled my mirrors. It crowded the edges of my vision. It was like driving inside a collapsing tunnel, with solid white walls on all sides except directly ahead, where the road continued into endless, dark wilderness. I drove past the building again, and I noticed something that I had not seen the previous times. There was a vehicle in front of that structure, an older model truck, abandoned and still, with frost covering every surface. And in the frozen cab, I could see the silhouette of someone. Someone sitting at the wheel. Someone who was not moving. I did not slow down. I could not slow down. The snow was less than 10 feet behind me now, moving at the exact same speed as my vehicle. No matter how fast or slow I drove, it was like I was being pursued by something intelligent and determined. The highway became hypnotic. Mile after mile passed in my perception, but the landscape never changed. The snow never stopped falling. The darkness never lifted. And somewhere in that advancing wall of white behind me, something was moving. Something with purpose. Something with hunger. I had been driving for what felt like hours, but my clock showed only 2 hours had passed since the snow first appeared. My fuel gauge was still 3/4 full. My engine was running strong, but my mind was beginning to fracture under the weight of the impossible situation. I was not moving forward. I was not trapped in a normal sense. I was trapped in something else. A space that was collapsing. A road that was alive. A wilderness that was slowly erasing me from existence while the thing behind me advanced with inevitable patience. Patricia's voice came through the radio, but it sounded different now. Distorted. Fading. She was telling me something about satellite data, about my signal degrading, about losing my position. She was telling me that from her perspective, I seemed to be slowing down. That my truck was coming to a stop. But I was not slowing down. I was driving faster than ever. The realization came to me then. with the clarity of terrible truth. Patricia was not ahead of me. She was behind me. The radio was carrying her voice backward through time and space. The checkpoint station was both ahead and behind. The snow was erasing the road in both directions. And I was not driving away from something. I was driving deeper into something. The Dalton Highway stretches for 500 miles through desolate wilderness. But what if there was something that stretched beyond that? What if there were roads that did not appear on any map? Routes that existed in the space between destinations? Pathways that led only to the point where they had begun? The abandoned building appeared again. Mile marker 235. The lights inside were brighter now. The shadows in the windows were clearer. And I could see now that the vehicle parked in front was mine. My truck, covered in frost, with me sitting at the wheel, frozen in place, not moving. The snow filled my mirrors completely. It was no longer falling. It was solid. A wall of white that had caught up to me and was now pressing against my rear bumper. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, absorbed. The darkness ahead and the snow behind were squeezing together, compressing the space I occupied into something smaller and smaller. The building was right in front of me now, always right in front of me. Mile marker 235. Always. I realized with absolute, final horror that I had never been moving forward at all. That the acceleration, the terrifying sensation of speed, the desperate flight through darkness had been illusion. That I had been driving deeper into a place where forward and backward held no meaning. Where the snow that fell only behind my car was not weather but a threshold. A boundary between what was real and what was not. And crossing that boundary, becoming part of the wall of white, becoming the frost on the vehicle that I saw frozen at mile marker 235, was my inevitable fate. The snow touched the front of my truck, and then I was not driving anymore. I was sitting, frozen, waiting, watching another truck approach through the darkness of the endless highway, watching its headlights grow brighter, watching the driver behind the wheel, panicked and afraid, pushing faster and faster, trying to escape the snow that falls only behind. Watching them reach mile marker 235, watching them see the building with the yellow lights in the windows, watching them see my frozen shape at the wheel of the truck parked in front, and understanding, with a clarity that transcends death and consciousness, that the road never ends. The Dalton Highway does not lead to destinations. It leads only to itself. The snow falls eternally behind, always advancing. The darkness stretches eternally ahead, always retreating. And every driver who takes this route, who accepts the job with the exceptional money and dreams of isolation, becomes another frozen figure watching the next desperate traveler approach. The building is always mile marker 235. The snow is always falling, and the road behind is always closing. Story 7. Sound the engine made. The engine sound changed in the cold, and I knew immediately that something was terrifying and wrong. I had been driving through the Alaskan wilderness for 3 hours, heading back to Anchorage from a job site near the Canadian border. It was February, the kind of deep winter night where the darkness feels alive and hungry. The temperature outside was hovering around negative 30 degrees, cold enough to freeze your breath before it leaves your mouth. And then, without any warning, my truck's engine shifted from its normal steady rumble to something else. Something that sounded almost like breathing. Alaskan drivers listen closely to their cars in the cold because your vehicle is the only thing keeping you alive out here. A breakdown in these conditions means death, plain and simple. You learn to hear every change in pitch, every unusual vibration, every hint that something might be failing. But this sound was different from any mechanical problem I had ever encountered. It was rhythmic, almost organic, like the truck itself had developed lungs and was pulling air through some hidden throat buried deep in the engine block. That sound made stopping feel like a worse choice than continuing. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, watching the speedometer climb to 60, then 70. The headlights cut through the falling snow, illuminating the narrow 2-lane highway that stretched endlessly ahead. On both sides, the black spruce forest pressed close, the trees twisted and bent under the weight of ice. There were no other vehicles on the road. No lights from distant houses. No signs of human civilization anywhere. Just me and that horrifying engine sound and the creeping fear that was spreading through my chest like frost. My name is Marcus, and I work as a construction supervisor on pipeline projects across Alaska. I have driven these roads hundreds of times, through blizzards and whiteouts and conditions that would terrify most people from the lower 48. I know how to handle myself in the wilderness. I know how to survive. But nothing in my 20 years of experience had prepared me for what was happening to my truck that night. The breathing sound grew louder, more insistent. I could feel it now, vibrations coming up through the steering wheel, through the seat, through the floor. It was like the entire vehicle was pulsing with some kind of disturbed heartbeat. I checked the temperature gauge. Normal. Oil pressure. Normal. All the dashboard indicators looked fine, but I knew something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then the heat started to die. The vents that had been blasting warm air into the cab began to cool. Slowly at first, then rapidly. Within minutes, I could see my breath forming white clouds in front of my face. The windshield started to fog from the inside. I cranked the heat to maximum, but it made no difference. The cold was seeping in, creeping through every seal and gasket, turning the interior of my truck into a freezer. I was still 50 miles from the nearest town, a tiny settlement called Beaver Creek that consisted of maybe 20 buildings and a gas station. At my current speed, I could make it in under an hour, but the temperature inside the cab was dropping fast, and I knew that if the engine quit completely, I would be dead within 30 minutes. Hypothermia does not care how tough you think you are. It does not care about your experience or your survival skills. It just takes you, slowly and inevitably, until your heart stops beating. The forest outside seemed to grow darker, thicker, as if the trees were multiplying in the shadows. Snow was falling harder now, big wet flakes that splattered against the windshield and stuck to the wipers. I turned them on, and they scraped across the glass with a disturbing screech that set my teeth on edge. The sound mixed with the breathing from the engine, creating a nightmare symphony that made my skin crawl. That is when I saw the first sign. It was one of those old wooden markers you sometimes see on rural highways, weathered and half buried in snow. As my headlights swept across it, I caught a glimpse of the words carved into the wood, "Turn back." Nothing else. No explanation, no indication of what lay ahead. Just those two words, stark and chilling in the beam of my lights. I did not turn back. Maybe I should have, but the idea of stopping, of reversing direction on this narrow road in the middle of nowhere, felt more dangerous than pushing forward. I told myself it was just some old prank, something left over from a local legend or a Halloween scare. But my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard that my fingers ached, and my heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The breathing sound from the engine changed again. Now it sounded wet, like something was gurgling in the mechanics, something thick and organic that did not belong in a machine. I could smell it too, a rotten odor seeping through the vents, sweet and nauseating. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve, but the smell was everywhere, filling the cab, coating my throat. Then the radio turned on by itself. I had not touched it. I had not been listening to anything, but suddenly it crackled to life, spitting static and white noise into the freezing air. I reached to turn it off, but before my fingers touched the dial, I heard something in the static. A voice, faint and distorted, but definitely human. It was saying my name. Marcus, 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 over and over, in a flat monotone that made my blood run cold. I punched the power button, killing the radio, but I could still hear it. The voice was coming from somewhere else now, somewhere inside the truck, whispered so softly I almost thought I was imagining it. The headlights flickered, once, twice, then they went out completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded sideways on the icy road before coming to a stop. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. I fumbled for my phone, my emergency flashlight, anything that could give me light. But when I found my phone, the screen was black, dead. The battery had been full when I started driving, but now it would not turn on. I sat in the darkness, in the silence, feeling the cold pressing in from all sides. The breathing sound had stopped. The engine had gone quiet. Everything was still except for the wind outside, which had picked up and was now howling through the trees with a sound like screaming. Then the headlights came back on, but they were not pointing at the road anymore. They were pointing into the forest, illuminating a scene that made every rational thought drain from my mind. Standing among the trees, maybe 30 feet from the truck, were people. Dozens of them, men, women, children, all standing perfectly still, facing me, their eyes reflecting my headlights like animals caught in the beam. They were not dressed for the cold. Some wore summer clothes, t-shirts and shorts. Others were in pajamas. A few were completely naked, their skin blue-white in the freezing temperature. But none of them were shivering. None of them showed any sign of discomfort. They just stood there, watching me with those horrible reflective eyes. I threw the truck into reverse, but the engine would not catch. I turned the key again and again, hearing only a sick clicking sound. The breathing had started again, louder now, coming from everywhere at once. From the engine, from the vents, from the walls of the cab. The truck was breathing, and so were the people in the forest. I watched in horror as they began to move, not walking, but gliding forward through the snow, their feet not leaving tracks, their bodies rigid and unnatural. They surrounded the truck on all sides, pressing their faces against the windows, their breath fogging the glass. Up close, I could see that their mouths were moving, all of them mouthing the same word over and over, though I heard no sound. My name. They were all saying my name. The little girl appeared directly in front of my windshield. She could not have been more than 7 years old, wearing a pink nightgown that was too thin for even a spring evening, let alone an Alaskan winter. Her hair was long and dark, hanging in frozen strands around her face. She placed both hands on the hood of my truck, and I felt the vehicle rock slightly under her touch. Then she smiled, and I saw that her teeth were black, rotted completely away. The engine roared to life without me touching anything. The headlights blazed so bright that I had to shield my eyes. And the truck started moving forward on its own, the gas pedal pressing down by itself, the steering wheel turning in my hands. I tried to fight it, tried to take control, but it was like wrestling with something infinitely stronger. The vehicle was driving itself, and all I could do was hold on. We accelerated rapidly, the speedometer climbing past 80, past 90, past 100. The people in front of the truck did not move. We drove straight through them, and I felt nothing, no impact, no resistance. They simply vanished like smoke as we passed through, only to reappear in my rearview mirror, still standing in the same spots, still watching. The road ahead was changing. It was no longer paved. The asphalt had given way to dirt, then to nothing at all. We were driving through pure wilderness now, weaving between trees that should have been too close together, following a path that did not exist. Branches scraped against the sides of the truck with sounds like fingernails on metal. I do not know how long we drove like that. Time seemed to stretch and compress. It could have been minutes or hours, but eventually, the truck began to slow. We emerged into a clearing, a wide open space in the heart of the forest. And in the center of that clearing was something that my mind refused to accept. It was a town, an entire town, buildings and streetlights, all covered in snow. But everything was wrong. The buildings were arranged in impossible configurations. Doorways that opened onto walls, windows that showed different views from different angles. The streetlights were on, but they cast shadows that moved on their own, crawling across the snow like living things. The truck stopped in what might have been the town square. The engine shut off, the headlights died, and in the eerie glow of those disturbing streetlights, I saw them. Hundreds of vehicles, maybe thousands, parked in neat rows all around the clearing. Cars and trucks from every era, some decades old, some brand new. All empty, all waiting. I understood then what this place was. It was where the road takes you when you do not turn back. It was the destination for everyone who ignored the warnings, who kept driving when they should have stopped. This was the town at the end of the world, the place where lost travelers came to rest forever. My door opened by itself. The cold that rushed in was beyond anything natural. So intense it felt like knives cutting into my skin. I knew that if I stepped out of the truck, I would never leave. I would become one of the frozen people in the forest, standing watch, luring in the next driver who made the mistake of continuing when they should have turned around. But I could not stop myself. My body was moving without my permission, my legs swinging out of the cab, my feet touching the snow. I stood up, and the cold wrapped around me like a living thing. I took one step forward, then another. The town was waiting. The shadows were reaching for me. That is when I heard the second engine, faint at first, then growing louder. Headlights appeared at the edge of the clearing, another truck pushing through the trees. I watched it emerge, watched it drive into the town square, watched it park next to mine. The driver got out, a woman about my age, her face pale with fear. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and I realized we were both about to join the collection. But here's what saved me. Here's the one thing that this nightmare town did not account for. I still had my lighter in my pocket, a battered old Zippo that my father had given me before he died. I do not smoke, never have, but I carry it everywhere as a memento. My frozen fingers closed around it, and with the last bit of will I possessed, I flicked it open and struck the wheel. The flame was tiny, pathetic in the overwhelming darkness and cold. But it was real, it was warm, it was human, and the moment it sparked to life, the entire town screamed. Not with sound, but with a vibration that I felt in my bones, in my teeth, in the core of my being. The shadows recoiled, the streetlights flickered and died. The frozen people in the forest turned and fled back into the trees. I ran back to my truck, dove inside, and slammed the door. The engine started immediately, purring normally, no breathing, no horror. The headlights came on, showing me the way out. I drove like a man possessed, retracing that impossible path through the forest, crashing through bushes and over logs, not caring about damage, only caring about escape. When I hit the paved road again, it was like breaking through the surface of dark water. Everything snapped back to normal. The heat worked, my phone turned on. The forest was just a forest again. I drove straight through to Anchorage without stopping, arriving at dawn with a truck that looked like it had been through a war. I quit my job the next day. I moved to Arizona, as far from Alaska as I could get. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, that breathing sound, and I wonder if I really escaped, or if the road is just waiting for me to let my guard down, waiting for the next time I am driving alone in the dark and the engine sound changes in the cold. Story 8. Road that should not exist. Have you ever taken a turn that changed everything? A single decision that revealed something horrifying about the world you thought you knew? What I am about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to understand that every word is true, and that some roads in Alaska lead to places that were never meant to be found. I was driving Route 3 between Anchorage and Fairbanks on a February night when I saw the turnoff that was not on any map. This highway is one I had driven dozens of times for work, a route so familiar I could navigate it half asleep. But that night, something appeared that had never been there before. A narrow dirt road branching off into the trees, unmarked, unlit, cutting through the forest at an angle that felt wrong somehow, like it had been carved by something other than human hands. In Alaska, remote roads rarely add new options. The state does not build highways in winter. Construction stops when the ground freezes solid. Yet here was this turnoff, fresh and clear, the snow packed down as if vehicles had been using it for years. My headlights caught the edge of it and I felt this strange pull. This unsettling certainty that passing it would mean missing something important. Something I was supposed to see. I should have kept driving. Every rational part of my brain screamed to stay on the main highway, to ignore this impossible road, to get to Fairbanks and forget I had seen anything. But the feeling would not leave me. It grew stronger with each second, a creeping fear that if I did not take this turn, something terrible would happen. Not to me, to someone else, to everyone. I slowed down. My hands turned the wheel before I could stop them. And just like that, I was on a road that should not exist, driving into darkness that felt older than the trees surrounding me. The forest closed in immediately. Spruce trees pressed close on both sides, their branches heavy with snow, blocking out the sky completely. My headlights revealed a tunnel of white and black, a pathway that curved gently to the left and disappeared into shadow. The road surface was smooth, too smooth, like it had been paved recently despite the freezing temperatures. No ice, no potholes, just this perfect strip of asphalt cutting through wilderness that looked untouched by human activity. My phone lost signal within seconds. Not unusual in rural Alaska, but disturbing nonetheless. The GPS flickered, showing my location as a blue dot in the middle of blank gray space. No roads, no landmarks, no indication that anything existed where I was currently driving. According to every map and satellite image, I was traveling through solid forest, through terrain that had never been developed. The temperature gauge on my dashboard began climbing. Outside it was -20 degrees, but my engine was heating up like I was driving through a desert in summer. The needle crept toward the red zone even though I was barely doing 30 miles per hour. I turned down the heat inside the cab, but that made no difference. Something about this road, this place, was wrong in ways that violated basic physics. Then I saw the first sign. It stood beside the road, ancient and weathered, the paint so faded I could barely read the words. But what I could make out made my blood run cold. Welcome to Ashford. Population 836. Established 1952. There is no town called Ashford in Alaska. I know this state. I know its history. I have studied maps and driven back roads for 15 years. Ashford does not exist, has never existed. Yet here was a sign, real and solid, promising a community that should not be possible. The creepy thing was not just the sign. It was the number, population 836. Present tense. Not was, not historical. As if people still lived there, right now, in a town that had been erased from every record. I drove forward because turning around felt more terrifying than continuing. The road widened gradually, becoming a proper two-lane street with gutters and storm drains. Streetlights appeared, old-fashioned models from the 1950s, their glass globes glowing with dim yellow light that barely penetrated the darkness. And then the buildings started. They emerged from the trees like tombstones, dozens of structures lining both sides of the street. Houses with peeling paint and sagging porches. A general store with boarded windows and a hand-painted sign. A diner with chrome trim and neon that no longer worked. A gas station with pumps that predated digital displays. Everything frozen in time, perfectly preserved, as if the entire town had been abandoned mid-century and left to decay in isolation. But here is the disturbing part. The buildings were not empty. Lights glowed in windows. I could see curtains, furniture, the shadowy outlines of rooms where people might live. Smoke rose from chimneys, gray against the black sky. And as I drove slowly down the main street, I saw figures moving inside the houses, dark shapes that passed behind glass, watching my progress through their forgotten town. My heart hammered in my chest. This was not possible. None of this should be real. Yet I could see it, smell it, feel the eerie wrongness of it pressing against my skin like physical pressure. The air itself felt thick, contaminated, like breathing in something that had been sealed away for decades. I passed a church with a tall steeple. The doors stood open despite the freezing cold, revealing an interior lit by candlelight. Rows of pews faced an altar where something dark and formless seemed to shift and breathe. I looked away quickly, afraid of what I might see if I stared too long. The town square appeared ahead, centered around a fountain that still ran despite the winter cold. Water splashed and sparkled under the streetlights, defying every law of nature. Around the fountain stood monuments, stone pillars with names carved into their surfaces. I slowed to read them and felt my stomach drop. They were death dates, hundreds of names, all with the same date of death. February 14th, 1953. An entire town, dying on the same day. Men, women, children. Everyone, gone in a single event that history had forgotten or deliberately buried. That was when I noticed the people in the square. They stood perfectly still around the fountain, maybe 30 or 40 figures, all dressed in clothing from the 1950s. They faced inward, looking at the water, unmoving, not talking, not breathing that I could see, just standing in the killing cold without coats or hats, their skin pale and waxy in the dim light. I hit the brakes without thinking. My truck stopped in the middle of the street and I sat there, engine idling, staring at these impossible people in their impossible town. One of them turned to look at me, then another, then all of them, their heads rotating in perfect unison, their eyes reflecting my headlights like animal eyes, bright and empty. They smiled, all at once, the same smile on every face. Too wide, too knowing, the smile of people who had been waiting a very long time for someone like me to find this place. I slammed the truck into reverse. The transmission screamed, but I did not care. I backed up 30 feet, 50, then spun the wheel and tried to turn around in the narrow street. The people in the square did not move. They just watched with those terrible smiles, their heads tracking my panicked movements. That was when I saw what was behind me. The road I had driven down, the street that led back to the highway, was gone. In its place stood a wall of trees, solid and impassable, as if the forest had grown back the moment I entered the town. I was trapped. The only way forward was deeper into Ashford, further into this nightmare that should not exist. The figures began walking toward my truck. Slow, shambling steps, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets controlled by amateur hands. They surrounded my vehicle on all sides, pressing close, their pale faces filling my windows. They raised their hands and placed them against the glass, leaving prints that steamed and sizzled, as if their touch generated impossible heat. I screamed. I admit that. I screamed like a child and punched the accelerator, driving forward through the crowd. They did not move. They did not scatter. My truck passed through them like they were made of smoke, incorporeal, not truly there despite looking solid moments before. In my rearview mirror, I watched them reform, still smiling, still watching me disappear deeper into their haunted town. The street curved and I followed it because I had no choice. Buildings became more decrepit, more damaged, showing signs of violence. Bullet holes in walls, burned structures with collapsed roofs, dark stains on sidewalks that might have been blood or might have been something worse. This was where the people of Ashford had died, I realized. This was where whatever killed them had happened, sudden and total and terrifying enough that their ghosts still lingered 70 years later. Then I saw the building at the end of the street. A massive structure, industrial, all concrete and steel. No windows, no markings, just a heavy door with a wheel lock, like an entrance to a bank vault. And painted above the door in red letters that gleamed wetly in my headlights, Isolation Chamber 7. Authorized personnel only. This was no ordinary town. Ashford had been something else. A secret facility, a government project, something that had gone so catastrophically wrong that they had erased it from history, buried it, hoped it would stay hidden forever. The door was opening. I watched in horror as the wheel began to turn, metal grinding against metal, the sound echoing through the dead town. The door swung outward on massive hinges and darkness poured out, literal darkness that moved like liquid, spreading across the ground, consuming everything it touched. And within that darkness, I could see shapes, hundreds of them, thousands, the people of Ashford, or what they had become, emerging from their prison after decades of waiting. I threw my truck into reverse and drove backward at 60 miles per hour, steering blind, praying I would not crash. Behind me, the darkness spread like a flood, racing down the street, swallowing buildings and streetlights, turning everything to shadow. The shapes within it reached out with elongated arms, grasping, hungry, desperate to touch something living after being trapped for so long. Then, like a miracle, I burst through an invisible barrier and the highway reappeared around me. Real trees, real road, real Alaska. I spun the wheel and accelerated forward, putting distance between myself and that impossible turnoff. And I did not look back until I reached Fairbanks 2 hours later. The next day, I drove that route again in daylight. I looked for the turnoff. I searched every mile marker, every break in the trees. It was gone. No dirt road, no opening, just solid forest, untouched and normal, like it had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. I know where I went. And sometimes, late at night, I still see them in my dreams. The people of Ashford, standing around their fountain, smiling their terrible smiles, waiting for the next person to take that turn and discover what the government buried in the Alaskan wilderness. Because that turnoff still exists somewhere. It appears when it wants to be found. And if you ever see a road that was not there before, a road that calls to you with unsettling certainty, do not take it. Keep driving. Some places were sealed away for good reason, and some doors should never be opened. Story 9. Forgotten highway. The darkness swallowed my headlights after only 30 feet. And that was when I knew something was terribly wrong. In all my years driving trucks across this country, through every state in every season, I had never experienced darkness like this. It was not just the absence of light. It was something hungry, something that wanted to erase me. I was 300 miles into the Alaskan interior, hauling drilling equipment to a site near the Yukon border. The dispatcher had given me new coordinates that morning. A faster route, he said. Nobody uses it much anymore, he said. That should have been my warning. Roads that nobody uses do not stay on maps for no reason. They disappear because something makes people afraid to drive them. There were no lights for miles. Not a single one. I kept scanning the horizon, waiting for that reassuring glow of civilization. A farmhouse, a radio tower, the distant haze of a town. But there was nothing, just my rig cutting through snow and an oppressive void that pressed against every window like something alive. The road existed alone out here, suspended in darkness so complete it felt like driving through the belly of some massive creature that had swallowed the world. My CB radio hissed with static. I tried every channel. Nothing but white noise and occasionally a sound that might have been a voice but was too distorted to understand. My cell phone showed no signal. The GPS had stopped updating 20 minutes ago, frozen on a stretch of highway that according to the screen should not exist. I was following a road that had no name, no number, and apparently no place in reality. The heating system roared at full blast, but the cold still crept in. Not normal cold, this was something else. Something that worked its way through metal and glass and insulation to wrap around my spine like frozen fingers. The temperature gauge on my dashboard read 40 below zero. Outside, it was probably worse. The kind of cold that kills you in minutes if your truck breaks down. The kind that makes you pray nothing goes wrong because out here, help is not coming. I had been driving for 4 hours without seeing another vehicle, without seeing anything at all except endless black trees and snow that fell in sheets so thick it looked like television static. My headlights kept catching movement at the edges, shadows that darted between trees, shapes that vanished when I tried to focus on them. I told myself it was wildlife. Moose, wolves, animals startled by my engine. But those explanations felt thin, felt wrong, because the movements were too deliberate, too coordinated, like something was pacing me, following, waiting. That was when I saw the first vehicle. It sat on the shoulder ahead, barely visible through the snow. A pickup truck, dark blue, covered in frost. I slowed down as I passed, my stomach clenching with unease. The truck looked old, 80s model maybe, and it was empty, doors closed, windows intact, just sitting there like someone had parked it and walked away into the wilderness. But why? And where did they go? A mile later, another vehicle appeared. A sedan this time, also empty, also old, positioned neatly on the shoulder like it had been carefully placed there. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The creepy realization was settling in that these were not random breakdowns. This was something else, something disturbing and deliberate. More vehicles began appearing, every quarter mile, every type you could imagine. Cars, trucks, vans, an old school bus with flat tires and broken windows, a delivery truck with faded logos I did not recognize. They lined both sides of the road now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching ahead into darkness like some nightmare junkyard that had no beginning and no end. I noticed something that made my blood run cold. None of them were damaged. No dents, no shattered glass, no signs of accidents or collisions. They had all been parked, deliberately left behind. And looking closer as my headlights swept across them, I could see personal items still inside. Jackets, bags, coffee cups, like the drivers had intended to come back, like they had just stepped away for a moment and then never returned. The fear was real now, undeniable. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get off this road while I still could. But the highway was narrow, no place to turn a rig this size, and something about those abandoned vehicles made me afraid to stop. Afraid that if I slowed down too much, I would become part of the collection. Another empty truck with my jacket still on the seat and my coffee still warm. My headlights began to flicker, just for a second. Then again, I checked the dashboard. Battery was fine, alternator working, but the lights kept flickering, dimming, like something was interfering with the electrical system, or draining it. Through the snow ahead, I saw something massive looming on the right side of the road. As I got closer, the horrifying shape became clear. It was a motel, one of those old motor lodges from the 50s. 2 stories, maybe 20 rooms. The neon sign was dark, but I could still read the name. The Northern Lights Motor Inn. The building looked abandoned, windows boarded up, parking lot buried under snow. But there was something deeply wrong about it, something that made my skin crawl. Every single room door was open, not just unlocked, open, swinging slightly in the wind, like someone had gone through and opened every door at once. And standing in each doorway, I could see dark shapes, motionless, watching the road, watching me. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine roared, 60 miles per hour, dangerous on a road this narrow and icy. But terror overrode caution. I needed to get past that motel, needed to get away from whatever was standing in those doorways. As I passed, every shape turned to follow my movement. Not their heads, their entire bodies, pivoting in unison like they were connected by invisible strings. And I realized with chilling clarity that they were not shapes. They were people, or had been, standing there in the darkness, watching, waiting, and I knew without knowing how that they had been the drivers of all those abandoned vehicles. They had stopped here, checked into rooms they would never leave. And now they were part of something else, something that wanted more. The motel disappeared behind me. I checked my mirrors, expecting to see it fade into the distance. But the glass showed only darkness, complete darkness. Like the motel had never existed. Like reality behind me had simply ceased to be. My radio suddenly crackled to life. Not static this time. Music. An old country song from the 70s. Johnny Cash maybe. But the sound was wrong. Distorted. Like it was being played underwater. And beneath the music, I could hear something else. Breathing. Slow and wet and wrong. Like something with lungs that were not designed for air. I turned off the radio. Silence filled the cab. Oppressive silence. The kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat too loud. Makes you hear things that might not be there. Scratching sounds, tapping, movement in the sleeper compartment behind me. I forced myself not to look back. Whatever was happening, I needed to keep driving. Keep moving forward. Because stopping meant joining those people in the motel. Those shapes standing in doorways. Those things that had once been human and were now something else. The road began to change. The pavement was deteriorating. Cracks spreading across the surface like veins. Potholes deep enough to damage my suspension. I had to slow down. Had to navigate carefully. And with each reduction in speed, I felt the darkness pressing closer. Felt something in the void growing bolder. That was when my engine began to sputter. No, God no, not here, not now. I checked the gauges. Fuel was fine. Oil pressure good. But the engine kept coughing. Losing power. The RPMs dropped. I pumped the accelerator. The engine roared briefly, then died completely. My rig coasted forward on momentum alone. Slower, slower, until finally, inevitably, it rolled to a stop in the middle of that nightmare highway. The sudden silence was deafening. No engine, no heater, just wind howling outside and snow tapping against metal. I turned the key. The starter clicked uselessly. Again, nothing. The battery was dead. Completely drained. Impossible. It had been fully charged. But dead nonetheless. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my heavy coat, stepped out into cold so intense it felt like being punched. The air burned my lungs. Frost formed instantly on my face. I had maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia set in. Maybe less. I popped the hood, checked the battery connections. Everything looked fine. But when I touched the battery casing, it was ice cold. Frozen solid, like something had sucked every bit of energy out of it. Every bit of heat, every bit of life. A sound made me turn. Footsteps, crunching through snow, coming from behind my rig. Slow and deliberate, I aimed my flashlight into the darkness. The beam barely penetrated 10 feet. But in that circle of light, I saw boot prints appearing in the snow. Fresh prints, being made right now by something I could not see. The unsettling truth hit me like a freight train. I was not alone out here. Had never been alone. Something had been following me since I entered this road. Pacing me, waiting for this moment. For the moment when my truck died and I had nowhere to run. More footsteps, surrounding me now, coming from every direction. I could hear them but could not see what made them. The eerie sounds grew louder, closer, a circle tightening around me like a noose. I ran, pure panic driving me forward. My boots slipped on ice. I fell, got up, kept running, away from my rig, away from the invisible footsteps, into the forest that lined the road. The trees were dead. I realized that immediately. Not winter dormant, dead. Lifeless husks standing in frozen soil, and between them, I saw more vehicles. Cars and trucks scattered through the woods like someone had driven them off the road and abandoned them decades ago. Some were rusted beyond recognition. Some looked like they had been there for years. But all were empty. All had their doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. I stumbled deeper into the woods. My flashlight flickered. The battery was dying. Of course it was. Everything died out here. Everything lost power, lost heat, lost hope. I shook the flashlight desperately. The beam steadied for a moment, illuminating something ahead that made me stop dead. It was a town. Not a real town. Not anymore. Just the skeleton of one. Main street lined with dead buildings. A gas station with shattered pumps. A diner with broken windows. A church with its steeple collapsed. All buried under snow and ice in decades of abandonment. And everywhere, I saw more vehicles. Parked in front of every building. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Like an entire highway full of traffic had detoured here and never left. I moved closer to the nearest building. A general store. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. I stepped inside. The floor was covered in frost and dirt and things I did not want to identify. Shelves stood empty. The register sat open and empty. But on the counter, I saw something that made my stomach turn. A coffee cup, still full, frozen solid. And next to it, a half-eaten sandwich. Also frozen. Like someone had been interrupted mid-meal and never came back. Behind me, the door creaked. I spun around. Nothing there, just wind and darkness. But the creepy feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Suffocating. Something was in this town with me. Many somethings. And they did not want me to leave. I left the store and moved down the main street. Every building told the same story. Interrupted lives. Abandoned moments. Coffee still in cups. Food still on plates. Coats still hanging on hooks. Like the entire town had been flash frozen mid-activity, like everyone had simply stopped existing all at once. At the end of the street stood the church. Something drew me toward it. Some terrible curiosity, some need to understand what had happened here. The front door was unlocked. It swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty street. Inside, the pews were full. My flashlight beam swept across rows of people sitting perfectly still, facing forward, hands folded, like a congregation frozen in prayer. My heart tried to climb out of my throat. I took a step closer. The light revealed horrible details. These were not people. Not anymore. They were corpses, perfectly preserved by the cold. Dozens of them, maybe 100, all dressed in normal clothes, all positioned like they had just sat down, and all with the same expression on their frozen faces. Not fear, not pain, acceptance, like they had known what was coming and had come here to meet it. I backed away slowly. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. This town, these people, this road, it was all part of something bigger, something ancient and patient and hungry. A trap that had been catching travelers for decades, maybe longer. Outside, the wind had stopped. The snow had stopped. The complete silence that followed was worse than any sound. I stood in that dead street surrounded by dead buildings and dead vehicles and dead people. And I understood with horrifying clarity that I was next. That my truck would join the others. That my body would join the congregation. That I would become another warning that nobody would ever see. Movement caught my eye. At the far end of the street, something was emerging from the darkness. Tall, wrong. Moving with a gait that was almost human but not quite. My flashlight beam found it. I wish it had not. The thing was made of shadow and frost and something else. Something that hurt to look at. It had limbs but too many. A head but the wrong shape. And where its face should have been, there was only darkness. Absolute darkness. The same darkness that had swallowed my headlights. The same darkness that filled this road. It moved toward me, not walking, gliding across the snow without disturbing it. And behind it, more shapes emerged. Dozens of them. All wrong, all impossible, all hungry. I ran back toward where I had entered the town, but the forest had changed. The trees had moved, or I had gotten turned around. I could not find the road, could not find my truck. Just endless dead trees and snow and darkness pressing closer. My flashlight died. Complete blackness. I fell to my knees. The cold was winning. I could not feel my hands. Could not feel my feet. My thoughts were slowing, getting fuzzy, hypothermia setting in. And somewhere in the darkness around me, I could hear them. The shadow things, circling, waiting, patient. I do not know how long I knelt there. Minutes, hours, time stopped meaning anything. But eventually, I saw light. Faint, red and blue, flashing. I forced myself to stand. To move toward it. A police car sat on the road. Empty, engine running, lights flashing. The driver door hung open. I climbed inside. The heater blasted warm air. The radio crackled with dispatchers calling numbers and names. Normal sounds, real sounds. I grabbed the radio microphone with frozen fingers. But before I could speak, I saw it, sitting on the passenger seat. A jacket. And on the jacket, a name tag. Officer James Mitchell. The same name that was engraved on a brass plate screwed to the dashboard. This was his car. And he was gone, just like everyone else. I looked in the rearview mirror. The street behind me was full of people, standing silently, watching, and I recognized faces now. The trucker whose rig I had passed miles back, the family from the sedan, the businessman from the fancy car, all standing together, all waiting, and among them I saw a police officer, standing at attention, watching me with empty eyes. I understood then, this was not a rescue. This was bait. One more trap. One more way to keep people here. Forever. The radio crackled. A voice came through, clear and calm and wrong. It said my name, said I should join them, said it was easier than fighting, said the cold would stop hurting, said the fear would end, said I could rest. I threw open the door and ran. Again, always running, but there was nowhere to go. The town surrounded me. The forest surrounded the town. The darkness surrounded everything. And I was just one more driver who had taken the wrong road, who had ignored the warnings, who had thought he could outrun the night. My legs gave out. I fell into snow, could not get up. The cold had won. I lay there looking up at a sky with no stars, just infinite darkness. And I waited for them to come, for the shadow things to claim me, for my truck to join the others, for my body to join the congregation. But they did not come. They just waited, standing in a circle around me, patient, because they had all the time in the world, because this road had no end, because the darkness here was complete, and there were no lights for miles, no lights anywhere. Just me and them and the frozen eternity of this horrible place where roads came to die and drivers never left. Story 10. Weight of the Winter Road. Have you ever driven through a place where the silence itself felt like it was watching you? Where every shadow seemed just a little too long, and the cold wasn't just temperature but something alive, something hungry? I learned the hard way that some roads in Alaska do not want you to leave. And once you have driven them, they never really let you go. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a long-haul trucker, 42 years old, and I have been driving these highways for nearly 20 years. I have seen every kind of road this country has to offer. The endless stretches of Interstate 40 through the Arizona desert, the winding mountain passes of Colorado, the fog-choked back roads of Northern California. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I encountered on Alaska Route 1 during the winter of last year. It started as a routine job. A shipping company out of Anchorage needed someone to deliver equipment to a mining operation near Coldfoot. The pay was exceptional, which should have been my first warning. But times were tough, and I needed the money. The route would take me north along the Dalton Highway, one of the most isolated and dangerous roads in North America. In summer, it is challenging. In winter, it is absolutely terrifying. I left Anchorage on a Tuesday morning in early February. The forecast called for clear skies, unusual for that time of year. The city disappeared behind me within an hour, swallowed by an endless expanse of white. Snow-covered spruce trees lined both sides of the road like silent sentries. The landscape felt empty in a way that pressed against my chest, made breathing feel like work. The first few hours passed without incident. My CB radio crackled occasionally with chatter from other truckers. Their voices a reassuring reminder that I was not completely alone in this frozen wilderness. But as I pushed further north, the voices grew fewer and farther between. By the time I crossed the Yukon River, the radio had gone completely silent except for the hiss of static. That silence was when I first noticed something was wrong. The sky had begun to change. What started as clear blue had transformed into something else, something that defied easy description. The color shifted between gray and a sickly yellow, like a bruise forming on flesh. The sun, which should have been low on the horizon, seemed to flicker as though struggling to stay lit. I convinced myself it was nothing. Alaska does strange things to light during winter. The endless darkness can play tricks on your perception. But deep in my gut, that primal part of the brain that evolution gave us to detect danger, I knew I was seeing something unnatural. Something deeply, fundamentally wrong. The temperature gauge on my dashboard showed negative 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Cold enough that if my truck broke down out here, I would likely die before help arrived. The heating system rattled and hummed, working overtime to keep the cab warm. I cranked up the heat anyway, suddenly feeling chilled despite the warm air blowing directly on me. Mile markers passed in a rhythm that should have been monotonous but instead felt ominous. Each one seemed to take longer to reach than the last, as though distance itself had become elastic, stretching away from me. I checked my speedometer repeatedly. 60 miles per hour, steady and constant. Yet something about the passage of time felt off, distorted. That was when I saw the first handprint on my window. On the outside, frozen into the glass. 5 fingers, human-sized, pressed against the passenger side window as though someone had been trying to get in. I slammed on the brakes, the truck sliding slightly on the icy road before coming to a stop. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at that print. Out here, miles from any settlement, in temperatures that would kill an unprotected person in minutes, someone had touched my moving truck. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, immediately regretting it. The cold hit me like a physical force, knives of ice stabbing into any exposed skin. My breath came out in clouds so thick they obscured my vision. I walked around to the passenger side, shining my light on the handprint. It was real, absolutely real. The condensation from warm flesh had frozen instantly against the cold glass, creating a perfect impression. But there were no footprints in the snow. No tracks of any kind leading to or from my truck. Just that single handprint, impossibly placed, inexplicably present. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds before the cold forced me back inside. My hands shook as I locked the doors, a ridiculous gesture given that I was alone in the wilderness. But that handprint had triggered something primitive in me, some ancient fear of being hunted, of being prey. I drove faster after that, pushing the truck to 70, then 75. The road stretched ahead, empty and white, swallowed by the gathering darkness. Alaska winters mean only a few hours of weak daylight, and I had burned through most of them. The shadows grew longer, reaching across the road like grasping fingers. The second disturbing discovery came about an hour later. My GPS showed that I had traveled over 100 miles since leaving the Yukon River crossing. But when I checked the mile markers, they indicated I had only covered 60. Impossible. I ran the numbers again and again. but the discrepancy remained. Either my GPS was malfunctioning or the highway itself was lying to me. I wanted to stop, to pull over and collect my thoughts, but something kept me moving forward. An irrational but overwhelming conviction that stopping would be dangerous. That something was watching the road, waiting for travelers to pause, to make themselves vulnerable. So I kept driving as night consumed the world around me. The headlights carved tunnels through the darkness, illuminating nothing but more road, more trees, more endless white. My eyes began to play tricks on me. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of my vision. Shapes that looked almost human darted between the trees, keeping pace with my truck despite the speed. Then I saw the car, a sedan, dark blue or black, sitting in the middle of the road about a quarter mile ahead. No lights, no movement, just there, blocking my path. I eased off the gas, letting the truck slow naturally. As I got closer, details emerged. The car looked old, maybe from the 80s or early 90s. Snow had piled on the hood and roof, suggesting it had been there for hours, maybe days. I stopped about 50 feet away, leaving my engine running, headlights pointed directly at the vehicle. Nothing moved. I waited, watching for any sign of life. Minutes ticked by. The heating system hummed. My breath sounded too loud in the confined space of the cab. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and coat and stepped outside again. The cold was somehow worse than before, sharp enough to make my lungs ache with each breath. I approached the car slowly, flashlight beam dancing across its surface. The windows were thick with ice, making it impossible to see inside. I knocked on the driver's side window. The sound was dull, muffled by the ice. No response. I tried the door handle, frozen solid. I moved to the back door, then around to the passenger side. All locked or frozen shut. The trunk looked slightly ajar, the latch not quite catching. That should have stopped me. Every horror movie, every true crime story, every ounce of common sense screamed at me to get back in my truck and drive around the abandoned vehicle. But curiosity, that terrible human trait that has gotten so many of us killed throughout history, drove me forward. I pried the trunk open. The metal screeched in protest, ice cracking and falling away. My flashlight beam swept inside. Empty, completely empty except for one item that made my blood run cold despite the layers of clothing protecting me. A trucker hat, identical to the one I was wearing. Same brand, same logo, same style, but it was covered in frost, frozen solid, as though it had been there for years. I slammed the trunk shut and ran back to my truck, not caring how I looked, not caring about anything except putting distance between myself and that car. My hands fumbled with the door handle, numb from cold and fear. I practically threw myself into the cab and locked the doors behind me. When I looked back at the sedan, it was gone, just gone. No tire tracks in the snow showing it had driven away. No sign it had ever been there except for the disturbed area where it had been sitting. The road stretched empty in both directions, my headlights illuminating nothing but pavement and snow. I sat there shaking, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations, so can exhaustion and stress. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, but the fear I felt was too real, too visceral to be dismissed as my imagination. I drove on, checking my mirrors compulsively, expecting to see that dark sedan following me. The road began to change. The surface became rougher, as though it was older, less maintained. The trees pressed closer on both sides, their branches reaching across the pavement like skeletal hands trying to grab my truck. The radio suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. But instead of voices, I heard only breathing, deep, ragged breaths that sounded both human and not. I switched channels. The breathing followed. I turned the radio off entirely, but I swear I could still hear it, faint but persistent, as though the sound was coming from inside the cab with me. That was when the real horror began. The temperature inside my truck started to drop despite the heater running at full blast. My breath began to fog. Frost formed on the inside of the windows, creeping patterns that looked almost like faces, like screaming mouths and empty eyes. I cranked the heat higher, but it made no difference. The cold was coming from somewhere else, somewhere the heater could not reach. I noticed movement in my passenger seat mirror, not on the road behind me, but in the mirror itself. Shadows moving independently of any light source, forming shapes that suggested human forms but were wrong in ways I could not articulate. They moved closer to the reflection of my face, reaching toward it with dark fingers. I covered the mirror with my hand, terrified to see what would happen if those shadows touched my reflection. The truck felt smaller suddenly, claustrophobic. The darkness outside pressed against the windows like something physical, like a living thing trying to force its way inside. A sign appeared in my headlights. Coldfoot, 20 miles. I should have been relieved. Civilization, other people, safety just 20 miles ahead. But that relief curdled immediately into dread. According to my GPS, Coldfoot was still over 80 miles away. The numbers did not match. Nothing matched. The world had become elastic and strange, following rules I did not understand. I pushed the accelerator down, the truck surging forward. The speedometer climbed to 80, then 90. Dangerously fast for icy roads, but fear had taken control. I needed to reach Coldfoot, needed to find other people, needed to confirm that I was still connected to reality. The road began to curve, switchbacks appearing where my map showed only straight highway. Trees rushed past in a blur. And then, impossibly, I saw my own taillights ahead of me. My truck, driving the same road, maybe 100 yards in front. I was following myself. I slowed down, and so did the truck ahead. I accelerated, and it matched my speed exactly. When I flashed my high beams, the truck ahead did the same, the light somehow reaching back to blind me. This was not a reflection. This was something else, something terrifying and incomprehensible. I pulled to a stop. The truck ahead stopped as well. We sat there, two identical vehicles on an impossible road, engines idling in the frozen night. I stared at the back of that other truck, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I got out and walked up to it, I would find myself sitting in the driver's seat. And maybe that other me would be just as terrified, just as confused. I threw my truck into reverse and floored it. The world blurred. Trees became streaks of darkness. The road unwound beneath me at sickening speed. I do not know how long I drove backward, only that when I finally stopped, the other truck was gone. I was alone again on a road that looked nothing like the Dalton Highway. The pavement was older, cracked, with grass growing through the fissures. The trees were different species, deciduous instead of evergreen, their bare branches creating canopies of shadow. And the sky had turned completely black but was filled with stars in configurations I had never seen. Constellations that hurt to look at, that seemed to move when I was not watching them directly. I checked every gauge, every instrument, fuel, half tank, temperature, -40, time. According to my dashboard clock, it was 3:47 a.m. But I had left Anchorage at 9 in the morning, and even accounting for the short winter day, it should not have been that late. Hours had vanished, swallowed by this nightmare road. My cell phone had no signal, which was not surprising in the Alaskan wilderness. But when I checked it anyway, I found something that made my skin crawl. Dozens of missed calls, all from my own number. Voicemails waiting. I did not want to listen to them. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the phone out the window and keep driving. But I had to know. I played the first message, my own voice, but wrong. The cadence was off, the words slurred and strange. It said only 5 words, repeated over and over. Do not reach the morning. Do not reach the morning. Do not reach the morning. I deleted it and played the second message. The same words, but this time my voice sounded farther away, as though I was calling from a great distance. The third message was just breathing, that same ragged sound from the radio. The fourth was screaming. I turned the phone off and threw it onto the passenger seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I was trapped in something, some pocket of reality that operated on different rules. And whatever controlled this place did not want me to survive until daylight. But I had no choice except to keep driving. Sitting still meant freezing, meant giving up, and despite the terror, despite everything wrong and impossible about my situation, I was not ready to die. So I drove forward into darkness, following a road that should not exist, in a truck that maybe no longer belonged to the world I knew. The hours that followed blurred together. I would drive for what felt like minutes only to check the clock and find hours had passed. Or I would drive for what seemed like hours only to discover mere minutes had ticked by. Time had become unreliable, another casualty of whatever haunted this stretch of highway. I saw things in those hours that I still cannot fully process. A moose standing in the middle of the road, but when my headlights hit it, the animal had too many legs, too many eyes. It turned its head to watch me pass, and its face was almost human. Buildings that appeared and vanished between one blink and the next. Road signs written in languages I did not recognize, symbols that hurt to look at directly. And always, The sensation of being watched, of something keeping pace with my truck, something vast and patient that was waiting for me to make a mistake. Morning did not fix the drive. When daylight finally reached the Alaskan winter road, the surroundings looked normal. But in Alaska, winter roads leave impressions that stay longer than the night. The drive felt finished, but not resolved. The sun rose slowly, transforming the sky from black to gray to pale blue. Trees became ordinary spruce and pine again. The road straightened out, matching my map. And there, finally, I saw the sign, Coldfoot Population 10. I had made it. I pulled into the truck stop, my body shaking from exhaustion and relief. Other trucks sat in the parking lot, their diesel engines rumbling. Real people moved between buildings, breath-forming clouds in the cold air. Normal. Everything looked blessedly, perfectly normal. I stumbled inside the diner, desperate for coffee and human contact. The waitress looked up as I entered, her smile faltering when she saw my face. She asked if I was okay. I opened my mouth to answer, to tell her everything, but stopped. What could I say that would not sound insane? Instead, I ordered coffee and sat at the counter, watching the other customers. Truckers mostly, men and women who looked as tired as I felt. One of them, an older guy with a gray beard, caught my eye. He gave me a nod, the kind of acknowledgement one driver gives another. Then he walked over and sat down next to me. He did not introduce himself. He just looked at me for a long moment and said something that made my blood run cold. He said he could see it on me. The road. He said some roads in Alaska do not follow normal rules, especially in winter when the darkness lasts so long. He said those roads change people, leave marks that others who have been changed can recognize. Then he stood up, dropped a 20 on the counter, and walked out without another word. I finished my coffee and went back to my truck. The cargo I was supposed to deliver sat in the trailer, untouched and intact. I completed the job, got my payment, and drove back to Anchorage. The return trip was normal, boring even. Clear roads, good weather, no hallucinations or impossible events. But that handprint on my window was still there, frozen into the glass. I have tried to clean it off 100 times, used every chemical and scraper I could find. It will not come off. And on very cold nights, when the temperature drops below zero, I swear I can see it moving. The fingers flexing slowly, as though whoever or whatever left it is still trying to get inside. I still drive long haul, still take jobs across the country, but I have never gone back to Alaska. I have turned down every job that would take me north of Anchorage, regardless of the pay. Because I know the truth now, some roads do not want you to leave, and once you have driven them, they mark you, they change something fundamental inside you. Sometimes late at night, when I am alone on some dark highway, I hear that breathing on my radio. And I know, deep in my bones, that the road is calling me back, that it wants to finish what it started, that one day, maybe soon, I will not be able to resist. I will take another job heading north. I will tell myself it will be different this time. But the road will be waiting. It is always waiting. And in the deepest darkness of an Alaskan winter, time stops meaning anything at all. The shadows become real, and morning does not fix everything. Some drives never really end. They just pause, waiting for you to come back and finish them. The weight of the winter road never leaves you. It becomes part of who you are, a shadow you carry, a whisper in the back of your mind. And every time I see frost forming on a window, every time I drive through darkness, I remember those hours that should not have existed. And I wonder if I ever really left that road at all. Or if I am still there, driving endlessly through the dark, following my own taillights deeper into something that has no name and shows no mercy. Before you leave, do one small thing. Subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories. This channel is a long road, and every subscription keeps it going. If these stories followed you through the night, leave a like so we know. And write a comment telling us which country you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. We read them all, and the next night on these roads will be waiting.